She slammed her hands onto a man's chest and screamed, "Nobody dies in my ER tonight." And every single doctor in that room froze. Because Audrey Jenkins was just a nurse. She had no authority to do what she was doing. She had no right to bark orders at surgeons. And she absolutely had no explanation for how she knew exactly which artery to clamp before the monitors even registered the bleed. 10 lives, 1 hour, zero hesitation. But the most terrifying moment wasn't the blood, it was when a 4-star Admiral walked through those doors, looked straight at her, and saluted. If this story already has your heart pounding, hit subscribe, drop the name of your city in the comments, and stay with me until the very last second. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The hospital smelled the way it always did on a Tuesday night, antiseptic and exhaustion, with something faintly sweet underneath that nobody ever talked about because everybody knew what it meant. It meant someone somewhere in the building was dying. Audrey Jenkins had worked at St. Jude's Memorial for 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She knew this not because she was sentimental about the place, but because she had trained herself to always know exactly how long she had been anywhere. Old habit, one she'd never been able to shake. She was 41 years old, 5'6", and entirely forgettable, which was precisely the point. Her badge said RN Emergency Department. Her file said she graduated from George Mason University, worked 2 years in Richmond, transferred to Norfolk for a quieter pace. Quiet. That word followed Audrey everywhere, and she wore it like a second skin. Her colleagues described her as competent, steady, and a little distant. Dr. Marcus Holloway, the ER's chief physician, once told a colleague she was the kind of nurse you stop noticing after a while. He meant it as a compliment. She took it as one. She did her job. She did it well. She went home. That was the arrangement she had made with herself 3 years ago, standing in a parking lot in Jacksonville, Florida, with a duffel bag over one shoulder and a one-way bus ticket in the other hand. She had made a decision that day, a decision so final, so absolute, that she had burned every bridge, cut every wire, and walked away without looking back. She was done, and for 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days it had held. Audrey was charting at the nurse's station when she heard the first radio call crackle through the overhead speakers. She didn't look up. Radio calls were background noise, part of the rhythm. Multiple vehicle collision I-64 eastbound near the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel. Initial reports indicate at least 30 casualties, repeat 30 plus. We are activating mass casualty protocol. She looked up. Beside her, Nurse Donna Reyes yanked off her headphones and grabbed the desk. Did they say 30 plus? Audrey said. Her voice was calm, completely unnaturally calm. Donna stared at her. Audrey, 30 people. I heard it. Audrey was already standing, already scanning the board. How many beds? How many nurses on shift? Where the trauma bays were staged? What was in supply? Her eyes moved quickly, mechanically, the way a chess player's eyes move across a board before the first piece has even been touched. This is going to be a nightmare, Donna whispered. Audrey said nothing. She was already walking. It didn't come in calmly. It screamed in lights, strobing the back doors bursting open before the vehicle had fully stopped, and the paramedics were already shouting before anyone in the ER had taken a breath. GSW to the abdomen, secondary blunt trauma B. P is 60 over palp and dropping. Dr. Holloway was there. He grabbed the gurney eyes, sharp voice steady. Trauma 1, move. The next ambulance pulled in before the first had cleared the bay. Then another, then 2 more at once. Within 8 minutes of that first radio call, St. Jude's Memorial Emergency Department went from a quiet Tuesday night to a war zone. Audrey moved through it the way water moves, finding every gap, filling every space, appearing exactly where she was needed. Before anyone had thought to call for her, she started IVs. She triaged incoming patients with a speed and precision that made the other nurses blink. She called out vitals before the monitors confirmed them. Donna, she said sharply, passing a gurney. The man in Bay 4 has a tension pneumothorax developing on the left side. Get Dr. Chen now, not in 5 minutes. Now. Donna blinked. How do you? His trachea is deviating. Go. Donna went. That was when it started to go wrong. Dr. Holloway was in the middle of a thoracic repair in Trauma 1 when the intercom crackled with a sound nobody ever wanted to hear in an emergency room controlled panic. The voice belonged to Dr. Sandra Yee, the second attending on duty. I need someone in Trauma 3 Right now, I have a ruptured spleen. She's crashing and I cannot. Marcus, I cannot. Holloway couldn't leave. He was elbow deep in a chest cavity, and if he pulled his hands out, the man on his table would die in under 2 minutes. He looked up at the nurse across from him. Get Dr. Patel. Patel's in surgery. He's been up there for 40 minutes. Dr. Richards? Richards collapsed. They think it's his heart. He's being treated in base 7. Holloway's jaw tightened. Who do we have? The intercom crackled again, more urgent this time. She's coding. I need someone. And then the doors to Trauma 3 swung open and Audrey Jenkins walked in. Dr. Yee looked up with the wild eyes of someone drowning. Audrey, I need a doctor. You've got me, Audrey said. You're a nurse. You've got me, Audrey said again, and there was something in her voice, a weight, a flatness, a certainty so absolute that Dr. Yee's argument died before it left her mouth. The patient on the table was a woman in her mid-30s, pale as chalk, blood pressure, in free fall. Audrey looked at the monitors, looked at the patient's abdomen, and in one fluid motion pulled on gloves. Her BP, she asked, 58 over 40 and falling. 2 large bore IVs, wide open. O negative, don't wait for a type and cross. Audrey's hands were already moving, palpating the abdomen with a confidence that made Dr. Yee's mouth fall open. She's got a grade 4 splenic laceration. You started? I was about to. Then we move now. Audrey looked at the scrub tech in the corner, a young man named Carlos who looked like he was about to pass out. Carlos, with me. You're going to hand me what I asked for, and you're going to do it fast. Can you do that? Carlos straightened. Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, the word came out automatically with the kind of automatic military snap that no civilian scrub tech would naturally produce. Neither of them acknowledged it. Audrey worked. She worked with the quiet ferocity of someone who had done this before, not in a hospital, not in a sterile trauma bay with proper equipment and backup personnel, but in worse places, darker places, places where there was no intercom to call for help and no ambulance coming, and the only thing standing between a person and death was her own 2 hands. Dr. Yee watched in silence for 11 minutes before she finally spoke. Where did you learn to do that? Audrey didn't look up. Do what? That, the way you packed that wound, the way you managed the bleed. That's not Audrey. That's not nursing school. That's not even most surgical residencies, where pressure's coming up, Audrey said. 72 over 50. She's stabilizing. Yee stared at her. Audrey, she needs a surgeon as soon as one is available. Keep her warm, keep the pressure going. Watch for rebleed. Audrey stripped her gloves, dropped them in the bin, and moved toward the door. I have 4 more patients waiting. She was gone before Dr. Yee could form another word. Out in the main bay, the chaos had reached its peak. Gurneys in the hallway, nurses running a man somewhere in the back, crying out in a language no one recognized. Audrey moved through it like she was walking through still water. She stopped at base 6, looked at the man inside, looked at his neck. He's got a C-spine injury, she said to the nurse beside her, a young woman named Priya who was fresh out of nursing school and had been on the verge of tears for the last 20 minutes. Don't move him. Don't let anyone move him. Collar on now, and if anyone tries to reposition him without imaging, you physically stop them. Do you understand me? Priya blinked. Yes, okay. Good girl. Audrey put a hand briefly on her shoulder. You're doing fine. Keep moving. Priya exhaled, steadied, kept moving. Bay 9, a teenage boy, 16, maybe 17, motorcycle accident. His helmet had saved his skull, but his chest was a different story. 3 broken ribs, one of them dangerously close to puncturing a lung. He was conscious, which meant he was scared, which meant he was breathing too fast, which was making everything worse. He grabbed Audrey's wrist the moment she reached him. Am I gonna die? His voice cracked on the last word. Audrey looked at him for 1 second, really looked at him, and something crossed her face. Something that wasn't there when she was working on the woman in Trauma 3. Something warm and tired and very, very human. No, she said. You sure? I'm sure. She covered his hand with hers. But I need you to breathe slower. Match me. She breathed deliberately, slowly in and out. Come on, with me. He watched her, followed her breath. His heart rate on the monitor began to tick down. There you go, she said softly. Be that you're doing it. He stared at her like she had just performed magic. Maybe in his terrified 16-year-old mind she had. She gave his hand one quick squeeze, then turned back to the task. Donna found her in the supply corridor, hands braced against a shelf, eyes closed. Audrey, Donna's voice was low. There are 9 confirmed saves so far tonight. 9. And 3 of them, Marcus told me himself, 3 of them should not have made it. Not with what they came in with. Audrey opened her eyes. And the 10th patient, Bay 12, 67-year-old male, severe cardiac event, secondary to blunt chest trauma. They've been working him for 15 minutes and Donna paused. They're talking about calling it. Audrey pushed off the shelf. No, they're not, she said. The room was quiet in the specific heavy way that rooms get quiet when everyone has started to mentally step back. The rhythm of the defibrillator paddles, the flat line on the monitor, the young resident, Dr. Kevin Park, looking at the clock with the expression of a man doing math he didn't want to do. Time of don't. Audrey was in the doorway. Park turned. Audrey, we've been working him for... I know how long you've been working him. She crossed to the bedside, looked at the monitor, looked at the man. 67 years old, heavy set, a wedding ring on his left hand, plain gold worn smooth. Someone's husband, someone's father probably. Give me 2 minutes. Audrey, he's been in PEA for 2 minutes. Park stared at her. Something in her tone, that same flatness, that same absolute certainty made him step back. She worked. Fast, precise, changing the compression technique, adjusting the angle, calling for a specific drug combination that made Park's eyebrows climb toward his hairline. That's not he started. It works, she said. Trust me. 60 seconds later, the monitor beeped. Everyone in the room turned to look. The line spiked, irregular at first, then steadying, then unmistakably, undeniably a rhythm. Park's mouth fell open. The man's chest rose on its own. Nobody spoke for 3 full seconds. Get him upstairs, Audrey said quietly. Now, he doesn't have a lot of time to waste. She walked out of Bay 12 and into the hallway, and she nearly ran directly into Dr. Marcus Holloway. He had come out of Trauma 1. His gown was soaked. His face was pale. He had clearly been standing in the hallway long enough to see what just happened in Bay 12, because he was looking at her the way a man looks at something he cannot explain and is no longer sure he wants to. Audrey, he said, Dr. Holloway. Her voice was steady, normal, the voice of a nurse who had done her job. That was what you just did in there. He stopped, started again. I've been a physician for 22 years. I have never seen a nurse. I should get back to the floor, she said. No. He stepped forward, not aggressively, almost desperately. No, you don't get to just, who are you? It was the question she had been dreading for 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. She met his eyes. I'm a nurse, Dr. Holloway. That is not what you are. A beat of silence between them, long enough to be dangerous. I'm the nurse who just helped save 10 lives in your emergency department, she said. That's what I am tonight. And she walked past him. The ER had started to breathe again. The frenzy was settling into the controlled, exhausted rhythm of aftermath, the counting of patients, the updating of families, the quiet collapse of adrenaline. People were finding walls to lean against. Someone started crying in the break room, and no one went to ask why, because everyone understood. Audrey stood at the nurse's station charting. Her handwriting was small and precise and entirely unremarkable. Donna sat beside her. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, you saved all 10 of them. The team saved them, Audrey said. Don't do that. Donna's voice was quiet but firm. Don't minimize it. I watched you tonight, Audrey. I have worked in emergency medicine for 16 years, and I have never seen anyone do what you did. The things you knew, the decisions you made, the way you just knew what was wrong before the tests came back. She paused. Where does that come from? Audrey kept charting. You're going to tell me it's experience, Donna said. I'm telling you right now, that's not experience. That's something else. Donna, I looked up that drug combination you used in Bay 12. Donna's voice dropped lower. It's not in any standard protocol. It's not in any nursing or medical textbook I could find. But I did find a reference to it, one reference. in a classified military field medicine manual that showed up briefly on a government database before it was pulled. She let that sit for a moment. You want to tell me about that? Audrey's pen stopped moving. For just 1 second, just one something shifted in her face. Something old and guarded and tired of being guarded. Then the mask came back smooth and practiced and impenetrable. I don't know what you're talking about, she said. Audrey, the ambulance bay doors opened, not with the crash and urgency of incoming trauma, slowly, deliberately, with the measured authority of people who were not in a hurry because they had never needed to be in a hurry in their lives. 4 men came through first, big men, and armed men, though their weapons were concealed well enough that only someone who knew exactly what to look for would have noticed the telltale lines under their jackets. They moved in a practice formation, 2 to each side covering angles, and they didn't look at any of the nurses or doctors. They looked at the exits. They looked at the ceiling. They looked at each other with the quick, efficient eye contact of people who communicated in a language that had no words. And then behind them walked the Admiral. He was in his mid-60s, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped silver hair, in the kind of posture that suggested every room he had ever walked into had immediately recognized him as the most important person in it. His uniform bore 4 stars. His expression bore nothing, absolutely nothing. The face of a man so experienced in concealing his thoughts that concealment had become his natural state. He walked into the emergency department of St. Jude's Memorial Hospital, and he didn't look at the patients, didn't look at the staff, didn't look at the blood on the floor, or the exhausted doctors leaning against walls. He looked straight at Audrey Jenkins, and he stopped. She felt it before she saw it, the same way she had felt the shift in atmospheric pressure that preceded the crash earlier tonight. A change in the air, an alteration in the weight of the world. She raised her eyes from her chart. Across the room, a 4-star Admiral of the United States Navy stood completely still. And then, with the slow, deliberate formality of a man who does not perform this gesture lightly, he raised his right hand to his temple. He saluted her. The entire ER went silent. Not gradually, not progressively. All at once, as if someone had reached into the air and pulled the sound out of it. Every conversation stopped. Every movement paused. 17 people in that room stared at the same impossible image, a 4-star Admiral surrounded by what were unmistakably armed operatives, standing in the middle of a hospital emergency room, saluting a nurse. Dr. Holloway, still standing near the nurse's station, made a sound that was not quite a word. Donna's pen hit the floor. The Admiral lowered his hand. His eyes never left Audrey. And then he spoke. His voice was low, unhurried, the voice of a man delivering a message he had rehearsed, and a message that was not in any interpretation optional. It's good to see you, Viper, he said. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Viper. Audrey didn't move. She sat completely still behind the nurse's station. Her chart open in her hands, and for one suspended crystalline moment, she was perfectly, absolutely motionless. The way a person goes motionless not from shock, but from the precise, trained response of someone deciding in the span of a single heartbeat exactly what to do next. Then she set down her chart, stood up, and looked at him with eyes that were no longer the quiet, forgettable eyes of the nurse everyone had stopped noticing. They were different eyes now, older, harder, the eyes of someone who had seen things that left marks not on skin, but somewhere deeper. Admiral Sterling, she said. Her voice was steady. Of course it was. It was always steady. I think, she said, we should talk somewhere private. The man beside Donna, a respiratory tech named Wendell, who had worked at St. Jude's for 9 years, leaned slowly toward Donna and whispered, "Did she just say Admiral?" Donna did not answer. She was staring at Audrey the way you stare at a painting when you suddenly realize the face in it has been watching you the whole time. Because in this moment, standing with her shoulders back and her chin level, and something ancient and dangerous living quietly behind her eyes, Audrey Jenkins did not look like a nurse who had gotten lucky tonight. She looked like someone who had been for 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days deliberately, carefully, expertly pretending to be ordinary. And the pretending was over. Admiral Sterling took 2 steps forward. He was not a man who asked for private conversations. He was a man who granted them. "The OR waiting room," he said, 2 minutes. He turned and walked. His operative moved with him, smooth and silent. Audrey looked back once, just once, and her eyes found Donna's. Donna was asking 100 questions with her face. Who are you? What is happening? What did he call you? Audrey's expression gave back nothing. And then she followed the Admiral. The OR waiting room was empty at that hour, beige chairs, a dead television, the particular hollow quiet of a space designed to hold people who were waiting to find out if someone they loved was still alive. The moment the door closed, Sterling turned. His formality dropped, not entirely, but enough to show something underneath it. Something that was almost, in a man like him, urgency. "We've been looking for you for 8 months," he said. "I wasn't hiding," Audrey said. "You most certainly were." "I was retired." "Viper, don't. Her voice cut clean and sharp. "Don't call me that here. This is my life. These are my colleagues. You don't get to walk in here with your stars and your operators. And James is alive." The words fell into the room and everything in it stopped. Audrey stared at him. 3 years. 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days ago, she had stood in a parking lot in Jacksonville with a duffel bag and a bus ticket. And the real reason, the reason beneath every other reason was a name. A face. A mission that had gone wrong in a jungle 8,000 miles away, and the intelligence report that came back 6 weeks later filed under KY. A confirmed with a photograph of a crash site that didn't leave room for doubt. Or so she had been told. "That's not possible," she said. Her voice was flat, clinical. The voice she used when she was keeping herself from feeling something she couldn't afford to feel. "It's possible," Sterling said. "We have confirmation. He's been alive for 31 months. Held. Deep cover operation, the location of which I cannot give you here." He paused. "But I can give it to you somewhere else." She said nothing. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere down the hallway, a PA system called a code in a voice so calm it was almost indecent. "He asked for you," Sterling said quietly. "Specifically by name." "By which name?" she asked. Sterling looked at her for a long moment. "The only one that matters," he said. "Viper." She stood in that beige waiting room with the dead television and the hollow quiet in 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days of carefully constructed ordinariness, cracked. Not shattered, not exploded, but cracked the way ice cracks on a river in early spring, a network of fine lines spreading outward from a single point of pressure. She had saved 10 lives tonight. She had come back to a city to be nobody, and in 1 hour she had been seen more clearly than she had been in years. And now a man she had buried, had mourned, was apparently somewhere in the world in a dark place waiting for her. "The nurse is gone," something inside her said. She recognized the feeling. She had spent 3 years trying to forget it. The cold clarity, the narrowing of focus, the disappearance of the noise. She looked at Admiral Sterling. "I'll need a full brief," she said. He nodded, "Just once. And I will need you," she said, "to explain to me carefully exactly why I should trust any intelligence coming from your office, given the last time you gave me confirmed KIA on one of my people." The Admiral did not flinch. He had probably not flinched in 40 years. "That," he said, "is a fair question, and you'll get a fair answer." "I'll need more than fair," she said. She turned toward the door, paused with her hand on the frame. Down the hallway, St. Jude's Memorial hummed and breathed and went about the relentless business of keeping people alive. Somewhere in Base 6, a boy with a C-spine injury was stable. In Trauma 3, a woman with a ruptured spleen was breathing on her own. In Bay 12, a 67-year-old man with a gold wedding ring was alive. She had done that. She turned back to the Admiral. "Give me 10 minutes, she said. He raised an eyebrow. "To say goodbye," she said. And she walked back out into the emergency department, back into the blood and light and noise, back past the colleagues who were watching her with new eyes, and she moved through it one last time with the quiet, careful steps of a woman who had always known somewhere deep in the place where certainty lives that it was never really over. That the ordinary life was a beautiful borrowed thing. That Audrey Jenkins had always been at the edges, someone else entirely. The monitors beeped. The clock ticked. And somewhere in the world, in a dark place she didn't know yet, a man who was supposed to be dead was waiting. She gave herself exactly 10 minutes, not 9, not 11. 10 because 10 was the number she had always used in another life when she needed to close something down cleanly before moving into the next operation. 10 minutes to wrap up, file away, and walk out without looking back. Old habit. She started with Donna. Donna was exactly where Audrey expected to find her, at the nurse's station, pretending to chart, watching the hallway door, with the fixed attention of a woman who had decided she was not going to pretend she hadn't seen what she'd just seen. When Audrey came through the door, Donna stood up immediately, and the look on her face was not confusion anymore. It was something closer to grief. "You're leaving," Donna said. Not a question. "Yes." "Tonight." "Yes." Donna pressed her lips together. She looked down at the desk, looked back up, and when she spoke again, her voice was steady, in the way that voices get steady when someone is working very hard to keep them that way. "Was any of it real? 3 years of was any of it real?" Audrey stopped. She looked at Donna, really looked at her the way she had looked at the 16-year-old boy in Bay 9 when he grabbed her wrist and asked if he was going to die. The full attention. No deflection. "All of it was real," she said. "Every shift, every patient, every bad coffee in the break room at 2 in the morning." She paused. "That part of me is real, Donna. It's always been real." "Then what's the other part?" Audrey didn't answer that. She reached across the desk and picked up the chart she had been filling out, the last one, and she finished the last 3 lines with her small, precise handwriting, and she set it down. "The patients I saw tonight," she said, "make sure Bay 6 gets his imaging before anyone moves him. The woman in Trauma 3 needs a surgeon within the hour, don't let them push it. And the man in Bay 12, Audrey." Donna's voice cracked on the second syllable. Audrey stopped. "Who is Viper?" Donna whispered. The name sat between them in the air. Heavy, old. The kind of name that carries weight not because of what it means, but because of what it has been through. "Someone I used to be," Audrey said, and she walked away. She found Dr. Holloway in the corridor outside Trauma 1, still in his bloody gown, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had been waiting. He straightened when he saw her coming. She stopped 2 feet from him, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the doctor who had spent 3 years not quite seeing her, and the woman who had spent 3 years making sure of it. "You're going to file a report," she said. "I don't know what I'm going to do," he said honestly. "Audrey, those interventions you made tonight, the procedures, the drug combinations, I need to understand. You saved your patients tonight, Dr. Holloway. You and your team. That's what your report should say." He shook his head slowly. "I watched you bring a man back from PEA with a protocol that doesn't exist in any manual I've ever read. I watched you diagnose a tension pneumo by looking at a patient's neck. I watched you take command of a trauma bay and make decisions that attendings with 20 years of experience wouldn't have made, and make them correctly." He leaned forward slightly. "That doesn't happen by accident. That doesn't happen from nursing school. So who trained you, and for what?" She held his gaze. "The patients are stable," she said. "That's what matters. It's not all that matters." "It has to be," she said. "Tonight it has to be." She could see him searching for the words to stop her, to make her explain, to demand the accounting that his rational, organized physician's mind was screaming for. She could also see the exact moment he understood that no such words existed, that she had already made a decision, and that his questions, however legitimate, were not going to change its direction. He exhaled through his nose. "Will you come back?" She thought about that, genuinely thought about it for the space of 2 seconds. "I don't know," she said, and that was honest. That was the truest thing she had said all night. She left him standing in the corridor. She pushed through the ambulance bay doors one last time, and the night air hit her face, and she stood for exactly 4 seconds, breathing it in, the salt off the Chesapeake, the diesel from the ambulances, the particular smell of a Virginia night in autumn. She memorized it with the efficiency of someone who has learned that you never get to choose which memories are the last ones. Then she turned and walked back toward the OR waiting room, and Audrey Jenkins, the quiet, forgettable, competent nurse whom Dr. Holloway had once described as someone you stopped noticing, began with every step down that hallway to disappear. Admiral Sterling was standing when she came back in. Beside him was one of the operators, a woman Audrey noticed, which she filed away as significant, with a hard-sided case, and the patient, closed-off face of someone with a clearance level that didn't appear on most organizational charts. The other 3 operators were positioned outside the door. 10 minutes, Sterling said. "I know how long it was," Audrey said. She looked at the case. "That for me." The female operator set it on the table without a word and stepped back. Audrey looked at Sterling. "Talk while I change." He didn't miss a beat. Operation codename is Nightfall. Your former team, what's left of it, has been running a deep penetration operation in the Sulu archipelago for the past 14 months. 11 weeks ago, contact was lost with the primary unit. He paused. We recovered 2 members. 3 are still unaccounted for. And James is one of the 3 unaccounted for. She said it as a statement. James Cutter is alive. We have signals intelligence confirming his location within a 40-kilometer radius. We have a secondary source, human intelligence, who made contact 6 days ago and confirmed he is alive and requesting extraction. Sterling's voice stayed level. He was also reportedly injured in the last contact exchange. The source was not specific on the nature of the injury, but he described it as, and I'm quoting directly, bad enough that you'll need someone who knows what they're doing. She opened the case. Inside, folded with the kind of precision that only people who have packed under pressure achieve, were closed gear documentation. And at the bottom, beneath everything else, a holster. She picked it up and set it aside without comment. Why hasn't the standard medical unit gone in? She asked. Sterling was quiet for exactly half a second too long. She turned around and looked at him. What aren't you telling me? She said. Sterling clasped his hands behind his back. The team's location is inside an operating area that is politically extremely sensitive. The kind of sensitive that means we cannot send in a standard extraction force without creating an international incident that would compromise 3 separate ongoing operations, one of which directly involves Allied intelligence services who are not aware of Nightfall's existence. So you need someone who can go in small, she said. Someone who can go in alone, make contact, assess the situation, stabilize, and hold until a window opens for extraction. The window is narrow. 72 hours maximum. Alone, she said flatly. The team we recovered gave us enough intel to get one person in cleanly. One person with the right medical skills and the right other skills. He looked at her steadily. You were the best rescue jumper and field medic this program ever produced, Viper. Not one of the best. Full stop. And James Cutter specifically. Don't, she said. He specifically asked. I said don't. Her voice was quiet, but the edge in it could have cut glass. She stood very still for a moment, and in that stillness, something was happening, something internal. Architectural, the reorganization of a person from the inside out. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Not dramatically, just a shade harder, a shade colder. The warmth still there, but further back, tucked away. Does he know it's me coming? The message was relayed, no confirmation received. So he might not know. He might not know. She turned back to the case. What's my insertion point? Sterling unfolded a map, physical paper, not digital, which told her everything she needed to know about how far off the grid this operation was sitting. He pointed. She looked. She memorized it in 15 seconds, the way she had been trained to memorize things, not photographically, but structurally, the relationships between points, the logic of the terrain. Transport, she asked. Vehicle to Naval Station, Norfolk. Helicopter to the carrier. From there, you'll transfer to a maritime insertion unit operating in the Celebes Sea. He paused. We leave in 20 minutes. She closed the case, picked up the holster, set it back down. I want full medical kit, she said, and my not standard field kit, full. Blood products, if available, surgical, pack advanced airway. Whatever he's dealing with, I go in prepared for the worst. It'll be waiting at Norfolk. I want to inspect it myself before we leave the carrier. Agreed. And I want the full SIGINT file on his location. Every ping, every intercept, every timestamp. I want to read it on the helicopter. Done. She looked at him. Her eyes were different now. Not cold, not hard, but focused in a way that changed their color somehow, or seemed to. The way a lens focuses, the way a scope aligns. When James made contact with your human intelligence source, she said, what exactly did he say? Sterling reached into his jacket. He produced a folded piece of paper, a transcript by the look of it, and held it out. She took it, unfolded it, read. The transcript was 4 lines. The 4th line made her close her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. She refolded it, handed it back. Keep that, she said. Viper. Don't need it. She touched her temple briefly. It's here. She picked up the case. The female operator stepped forward to take it, and Audrey shook her head once, a single minimal gesture that said everything it needed to say, and carried it herself. At the door, she stopped. Sterling was watching her with an expression that was as close to complicated as a four-star admiral ever permitted himself in professional settings. 31 months, she said without turning around. He was alive for 31 months, and you're telling me now. We didn't know for certain until... Don't. She stopped him again. Her voice was very quiet. That's a conversation for when I get back. With him alive and in front of you and me in the same room. Not tonight. Tonight I need to focus. A beat. But that conversation will happen. Understood. Understood, Sterling said. She walked out. The operators fell into formation around her, without instruction, smooth automatic, the choreography of people who had done this many times. They moved down the hospital corridor past the nurses' station, where two nurses who hadn't witnessed the earlier moment looked up curiously and then looked away past the closed door of the break room, where someone was still crying softly past the board with its patient roster and its dry erase markers in the comfortable, ordinary complexity of a normal emergency department night. She didn't look at any of it. She was already somewhere else. Not physically. She was walking through a hospital in Norfolk, Virginia, surrounded by armed operators, heading for a car that would take her to a base, that would put her on a helicopter, that would carry her towards something she had spent 3 years and 4 months trying to outrun. But in every way that mattered, in the way that she was already processing threat assessment and insertion windows and the specific medical implications of a 14-month deep penetration operation on a grown man's body and mind, she was already gone. The ambulance bay doors opened. Cold air, night sky, the distant sound of traffic on the interstate. She stepped through, and behind her, Dr. Marcus Halloway stood at the far end of the corridor watching her go. He had followed not to stop her. He understood now that stopping her was not a thing that was possible, but because something in him needed to see it, needed to watch the door close on the explanation he was never going to get tonight. He stood there for a long time after the sound of the vehicle faded. Then he went back to his patients, because the work didn't stop. It never stopped. That at least was something he and the woman he'd just watched disappear had entirely in common. Back in the OR waiting room, Donna Reyes stood alone looking at the table where the hard-sided case had been. There was nothing there now. No evidence, no explanation. Just the beige chairs and the dead television and the hollow quiet. She picked up the pen she had dropped earlier. She stood there for a moment, turning it slowly in her fingers. Then she pulled out her phone and typed a name into the search bar. Not Audrey Jenkins. Another name, a word, really a single word, that a four-star admiral had walked into her emergency department and used like a key in a lock. Viper. The results that came back were sparse, fragmented. References and forms she didn't recognize, a redacted document summary on a government accountability database, a 3-line mention in a congressional hearing transcript from 8 years ago, the name appearing once in passing in a context she couldn't fully parse. But enough. Enough to understand that the woman who had worked beside her for 3 years, who had eaten bad cafeteria sandwiches with her and complained about scheduling and remembered the names of every patient's family member, that woman had a past that made tonight's emergency feel by comparison like a quiet night. Donna set her phone face down on the table. She picked up her chart. She went back to work. Because the work didn't stop. It never stopped. And somewhere above the Atlantic, climbing through 30,000 feet in a Navy helicopter with a hard-sided case across her knees and a SIGINT file in her hands, Audrey Jenkins, who was not Audrey Jenkins, who was something older and sharper and more dangerous than that name had ever contained, read the 4-line transcript one more time. Not because she needed to. She had it memorized already the way she memorized everything. She read it because of the 4th line, the one that had made her close her eyes for 2 seconds back in that waiting room. 4 words. James Cutter's voice relayed through a source she'd never met, transmitted across channels she wasn't supposed to know existed, delivered to an admiral who had flown to Norfolk tonight, specifically because no message, no phone call, no chain of command was going to get the job done. 4 words. Tell Viper. Tell her. She folded the transcript in her mind and put it somewhere she wouldn't touch again until the mission was over. Until he was in front of her, alive and real and accountable for 31 months of silence. She looked out the window at the dark water below. The helicopter banked east, and Viper went to work. The carrier was called the USS Ronald Reagan, and it smelled like jet fuel and metal, and the specific institutional smell of 10,000 people living in a steel box on open water. Audrey had been on carriers before. She knew the rhythm of them, the constant low hum of the engines, the organized noise, the way everyone moved with purpose, because on a carrier, there was no such thing as standing still. She didn't sleep on the helicopter ride. She read. The SIGINT file was 43 pages. She read all of it twice, and by the time the helicopter touched down on the flight deck, she had built a picture, not complete, not clean, but enough. Enough to understand that James Cutter had not simply been captured. He had gone dark voluntarily 11 weeks ago for reasons that the file danced around without ever naming directly. Reasons that someone, at some level of this operation, had chosen not to include in the official intelligence product. That omission was the first thing that made the back of her neck tighten. The second thing was the human intelligence source, identified in the file only as Cardinal. No further details, no background, no reliability assessment. Just a name and a message. In any intelligence product she had ever read, a source without a reliability assessment was either brand new or too sensitive to document, or someone was managing what she was allowed to know. She filed both concerns in the part of her mind where she kept things that required watching. The female operator, she had learned her name was Torres. Just Torres, no first name offered or requested, met her at the bottom of the ladder and walked her below decks without speaking. They moved through corridors with the economical efficiency of two people who understood that small talk was not on the agenda. Torres pushed open the door to a briefing room and stepped aside. Inside, three people were waiting. The first was a man she didn't recognize, late 30s, compact build, the careful stillness of someone trained to look like he was doing nothing while missing absolutely nothing. He had lieutenant commander insignia and the specific, slightly distant expression of a man who had been told he was going to meet someone remarkable and had decided in advance to be skeptical. The second was a woman with the insignia of a Navy flight surgeon who was standing next to a medical kit that was, Audrey was relieved to see, substantially more comprehensive than standard field issue. The surgeon looked at Audrey with professional assessment and something underneath it that might have been curiosity. The third person made Audrey stop walking. He was sitting at the far end of the table, and he was older than Sterling, older than anyone she had expected to see in this room, with a face she recognized from a photograph she had seen exactly once, 8 years ago, in a classified file that she had been instructed to read and return without copying. General Raymond Cross, retired, or supposedly retired. He looked at her with eyes that had seen a great deal and were not impressed by most of it. "Sit down, Viper," he said. She sat. Not because she was following his instruction, but because sitting was tactically correct. It gave her the table between them and the door behind her, and a full view of everyone in the room. "I wasn't briefed on your involvement," she said. "No," Cross agreed pleasantly. "You weren't." "Why are you here?" "Because this operation is mine," he said. "Nightfall was my design, my authorization, my personnel. Sterling handles the logistics. I handle the architecture." He folded his hands on the table. "I'm here because I want to look at you in person before you go in." She looked back at him steadily. And I want to know if you're going in to complete the mission or if you're going in to find James Cutter." The room was very quiet. "They're the same objective," she said. "They're not always the same objective," Cross said. "That's precisely my concern." The lieutenant commander, she'd find out his name was Reyes. No relation to Donna, just the universe being casually ironic, shifted in his seat. He had been skeptical coming in. Now he looked uncomfortable, the way people look when a conversation goes somewhere they didn't expect, and they're not sure they want to be in the room for it. Audrey kept her eyes on Cross. "The mission objective is to locate, stabilize, and hold James Cutter until the extraction window opens. That's what I was briefed. That is what I will execute. And if executing it requires a decision that conflicts with your personal feelings about the man, then I'll make the decision that completes the mission." Cross studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, a single small nod that was less agreement than acknowledgement. He had asked his question. He had heard her answer. Whether he believed it was a separate matter, and his face gave nothing away about it. "The medical kit," he said, turning to the flight surgeon. The surgeon stepped forward and opened the kit on the table. She spoke quickly and efficiently, Blood products, surgical pack, advanced airway antibiotics, covering the full spectrum. Pain management, a portable ultrasound unit, no bigger than a paperback book. Audrey listened, asked 3 questions, and the surgeon answered all 3 correctly. Good. At least the medical piece had been handled by someone who knew what they were doing. Insertion window is 0300, Reyes said, finding his footing, now that the conversation had moved to logistics. He pulled up a map on the screen at the end of the room. Maritime insertion 2 kilometers offshore. You'll have a surface vehicle to the beach, then you're off foot. Cardinal's last confirmed location of the target is here. He pointed. Abandoned agricultural facility 11 clicks inland. You should reach it in approximately 3 hours on foot, given the terrain. What's the local security situation? Reyes and Cross exchanged a look. It was fast a quarter of a second, but she caught it. Reyes, she said. There is an armed group operating in the area, Reyes said. Regional militia loosely affiliated with a larger organization. They are the reason the target has not been able to self-extract. How many? He estimated 30 to 40 personnel in the immediate area. Estimated, she said. Our last overhead pass was 72 hours ago. Numbers may have shifted. She looked at the map for a moment. 30 to 40 armed militia. 1 woman alone with a medical kit in 72 hours. She ran the arithmetic in her head, not dramatically, just practically the way she had run similar arithmetic in other places in other years. Then she looked at Cross. Cardinal, she said, I want a direct contact protocol. Cross shook his head. Cardinal's identity is compartmented above your access level. I'm going in alone to extract an asset based on intelligence from a source with no reliability assessment and no accessible identity. You understand that puts me in an extraordinarily vulnerable position if the intelligence is wrong. The intelligence is not wrong, Cross said. You'll understand if I'd prefer to verify that independently. I understand it perfectly, Cross said. The answer is still no. She held his gaze for 3 full seconds. He didn't move. He had probably sat across a table from people a great deal more intimidating than her and not moved. She filed that away too. All right, she said, and her voice gave nothing away. What's the authentication protocol for Cutter? How do I confirm it's actually him? Reyes slid a single index card across the table. She read it. A challenge phrase. A response phrase. Standard simple, the kind of verification protocol designed for people operating in degraded conditions who might not have the cognitive bandwidth for anything complicated. She memorized it in 5 seconds, slid the card back. I'll need 2 hours of downtime before insertion, she said. We have a bunk. I don't need a bunk, I need a room with no one in it. She stood. 2 hours. Cross watched her move toward the door. Viper. She stopped. When you find him, Cross said. And I say when deliberately there's a secondary objective. There's a hard drive. James was carrying it when contact was lost. It contains the full operational record of Nightfall, including sources and methods. If that drive falls into the wrong hands, if he's injured, the drive is secondary, she said. The drive, secondary, and she said, and the word came out with a finality that apparently even General Raymond Cross, retired, was willing to respect. She walked out. Torres was in the corridor waiting. Of course she was. You heard that, Audrey said. Not accusatory, just factual. I hear most things, Torres said. What do you think about Cross? Torres was quiet for a moment. I think he's the kind of man who puts pieces on a board and then watches to see how they move. And if a piece moves in a direction he didn't plan, he removes it from the board, Torres said, with the matter-of-fact evenness of someone stating a physical law. He's done it before. Audrey nodded slowly. Thank you. I'm saying this, Torres said, because I was on the original Nightfall team before I was reassigned. I knew James Cutter. She paused. He's a good man, one of the best I've served with. You should know that the person you are going to find in that building is not going to be the same person you remember. 31 months does things. Captivity does specific things. Whatever you're expecting, prepare to be wrong about it. It was the most Torres had said in total since Audrey had met her. It cost something clearly. She could see it in the slight tightening of the other woman's jaw, the controlled exhale afterward. I know what captivity does, Audrey said quietly. Torres looked at her. Something shifted in her expression, not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. Yes, she said after a moment. Imagine you do. They stood in the corridor for a moment that was entirely silent and entirely necessary. Then Audrey went to find her room with no one in it. She didn't sleep. She hadn't expected to. She sat on the floor with her back against the bunk, and she let the 2 hours pass in the particular kind of stillness that isn't rest, but is the next best thing. The clearing of unnecessary thought, the narrowing of focus to the task, the putting away of everything that was not immediately operational. She thought about James for exactly 12 minutes. She allowed herself that. 12 minutes to feel the full weight of 31 months, the mourning, the anger that lived underneath the mourning, the specific grief of having reorganized your entire life around a person's death only to be told that the death was wrong. She let it move through her completely, the way you let a current move through you when you're in the water leaning into it rather than fighting it. Then she put it away. Not gone, not resolved, just away in the locked compartment she had been building and maintaining her entire adult life, the one that had allowed her to function in impossible circumstances and walk out the other side. The compartment that Donna Reyes, sitting in a Norfolk hospital right now, turning a pen in her fingers, could not have imagined existing inside the quiet nurse she thought she knew. At 02:15, Torres knocked twice on the door. Audrey was already standing. The insertion went clean. Water was cold, currents moderate. The surface vehicle was handled by a two-person team who said nothing and needed to say nothing. She hit the beach at 03:22, took her bearings in 4 seconds, and moved inland. 11 kilometers, 3 hours. She moved faster than the estimate. In the darkness and the silence, with the medical kit across her back and the weight of everything the night had already held, settling into something purposeful and forward-moving, she thought about what Torres had said. Prepare to be wrong about it. She thought about the man she had known, the one she had worked alongside for 6 years, the one whose voice she had memorized before she ever admitted to herself that she was memorizing it, the one whose name had appeared in the KIA report that she had read in a parking lot in Jacksonville, while a bus idled at the curb and a whole new ordinary life waited. She thought about the 4th line of the transcript. 4 words. Tell Viper. Tell her. Tell her what exactly the transcript didn't include what followed. Whether there had been more and it had been cut, or whether that was everything James had managed before the contact broke, she didn't know. She had asked Sterling back in the OR waiting room. He had said that was all we received. She had believed him in the moment. She was less sure now. She was 2 kilometers from the facility when she heard it. A sound, not nature, not wind. The particular unmistakable sound of someone moving with deliberate care in an environment where deliberate care was necessary. She stopped, went completely still. Not the stillness of hesitation, but the trained stillness of someone who has learned that the body, when it stops producing movement and sound, becomes functionally invisible for critical seconds. She listened. The sound came again. To her left, roughly 15 meters, one person, moving slowly, not patrol movement, too careful, too hesitant. Someone trying not to be found. She shifted the kit silently and moved toward it. The man she found was not James. He was young, mid-20s at most, with the look of someone who had been living rough for weeks. Thin, exhausted, watching her with eyes that were calculating how fast he could run and whether running would help. He was Filipino, local, and he was wearing on his left wrist a very specific paracord bracelet that she recognized because she had made it. She had braided it herself 7 years ago on a forward operating base in a country whose name didn't appear in her official service record, and she had given it to exactly one person. She stared at the bracelet. The young man saw where she was looking. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded piece of paper. He held it out with the particular carefulness of someone who has been told that delivering this object correctly is the most important thing he will ever do. She took it, unfolded it. It was handwritten. The handwriting was bad, shaky, cramped, the handwriting of someone writing in pain or in darkness or both, but she knew it. She would have known it in any condition, on any surface. She had read enough of it over enough years. 3 lines. Don't trust the source. Cardinal is compromised. They know you're coming. She looked up from the paper. The young man was watching her with steady, serious eyes. How long ago did he write this? She asked. 6 hours, he said. His English was careful, deliberate. He said you would come. He said to find you before you reached the building. 6 hours. 6 hours ago, James Cutter, injured captive, 31 months gone, had trusted a young man with a paracord bracelet and a folded piece of paper and the instruction to intercept whoever came walking out of the dark. He had known she was coming. Before she'd even agreed to come, before she'd left that waiting room in Norfolk, someone had told him she was coming, which meant the communication chain ran in both directions, which meant Cross or Sterling or someone in that briefing room had contact with him that they hadn't disclosed. Cardinal is compromised. The operation that had brought her here was built on intelligence from a source that James himself was now telling her was burned, which meant one of two things: either James was wrong, which was possible but required evidence, or someone had sent her into a compromised situation knowingly. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket. "Where is he right now?" she asked the young man. "Same building, but not where they told you." He reached into his other pocket and produced a hand-drawn map, rough functional, the map of someone who knew the terrain from living in it rather than studying it. He pointed. "Here, separate room. There are 2 guards, not the number they told you." "How many?" she said. He held up 8 fingers. 8, not 2. She had come in prepared for 2. 8 changed the mathematics considerably, but it didn't change the answer because the answer was always the same when James Cutter was on the other side of it. She looked at the young man. "What's your name?" "Marco," he said. "Marco," she said. "You have done something extremely brave tonight. I need you to go back to wherever is safe for you and stay there until morning. Can you do that?" He nodded, then he hesitated. "The man inside, is he someone important to you?" She looked at him for a moment. "Yes," she said. Marco nodded again slowly with the gravity of someone who understood that the answer to that question was the reason she was standing in the dark 11 kilometers inland on an island she had no official reason to be on. "Then bring him home," he said simply. He melted back into the dark. She stood alone for a moment with the paper in her pocket and the revised count in her head and the understanding cold and clean and clarifying that someone in the chain of command had sent her into this operation knowing it was compromised. That was the part that would require the conversation Sterling had promised her later. That was the part she was going to remember in detail with documentation when this was over. But right now, there were 8 armed militia personnel between her and James Cutter. She checked the medical kit, checked the holster, looked at the hand-drawn map one more time. Then she moved. She took the first guard at 4:17 in the morning, not with the holster, with her hands specifically with the particular application of pressure to a specific point on the neck that renders a person unconscious in under 4 seconds and leaves no lasting damage if done correctly. She had done it correctly many times. She did it correctly now. He went down without a sound, and she lowered him to the ground with the same careful efficiency she used when moving patients who couldn't move themselves, and she thought not for the first time in her life about how the skills that kept people alive and the skills that took people out of the fight were separated by almost nothing. Direction of application, intent. That was all. She moved along the wall. Marco's map was accurate. The building's layout was exactly as drawn, which told her that Marco had been inside recently, which told her something about how James had been communicating and how long he had been planning this. Not improvising, planning. That was James. Even 31 months in, even injured and held, and running on whatever reserves a man had left after that kind of time, he had been thinking 3 steps ahead. The second guard was more alert. He turned at the wrong moment, not toward her. Just a random shift, the unconscious restlessness of a man doing a boring job in the middle of the night, and for 1 second, that lasted considerably longer than a second, they were in the same space with full awareness of each other and everything balanced on the edge of a sound. She moved first. She always moved first. That was the lesson that had been driven into her over years of training and confirmed by years of reality. The person who commits first dictates the outcome. She committed before the guard's brain had finished processing what his eyes were telling it, and it was over before either of them had made a noise worth hearing. 2 down, 6 to go. She found the room on Marco's map, a back corner of the building separated from the main space by a corridor and a door that was bolted from the outside, which told its own story about who was being kept from whom. She stopped outside it, listened, heard breathing slow, deliberate, controlled. The breathing of someone who was awake and managing pain. She put her mouth close to the door. 7 Echo Tango, she said barely above a breath. The challenge phrase. Her voice was steady. Her heart was not, But her heart was not her voice's problem right now. A pause. It lasted long enough that she felt the first cold finger of doubt, the possibility that Marco had been wrong about the room, or that she had the wrong door, or that the man on the other side of it was not in any condition to lame a 7-9er. The response phrase, ragged, quiet, real. She slid the bolt. The door opened. She had told herself in those 2 hours on the carrier floor that she was prepared to be wrong about what she found. Torres had told her, she had told herself, she had built the expectation of a changed man, a damaged man, a man who did not resemble the one she had memorized and mourned. She was still not prepared. He was against the far wall sitting up because lying down was apparently not an option, and the first thing she saw was the leg. The left leg splinted with what looked like pieces of wooden crating and strips of fabric, the improvised field medicine of a man with nothing available but ingenuity. The second thing she saw was his face. He was thinner than she had ever seen him. There were lines in it that hadn't been there before. Not age lines, something else, the kind of lines that come not from years, but from specific accumulated weight. His hair was longer. He had a beard. His eyes, when they found her in the doorway, were exactly the same, sharp and dark, and immediately completely alert, the eyes of a man who had never once in his captivity stopped paying attention. He looked at her for a moment. She looked at him. "You're late," he said. His voice was rougher than she remembered. But underneath the roughness, it was still his voice, and the two words he had chosen, the particular, impossible lightness of those two words after 31 months, did something to her that she was not going to examine right now. Not here, not with 6 armed personnel still unaccounted for, in a compromised operation in a 72-hour window that was already burning. "I took a detour," she said. She was already moving into the room, already dropping to one knee beside him, hands going to the leg with professional assessment, not permission, because he knew her well enough to know that asking permission was not how this worked. "This is a fracture tibial 3 weeks ago." He watched her hands. "Doesn't affect mobility as much as it looks." "That's not possible." "I've been working on it." She looked up at him briefly. "Of course you have." She opened the medical kit. Assessed the improvised splint, actually well constructed. Better than most field improvised splints she had seen, which surprised her until she remembered that James had done a field medicine rotation 6 years ago, specifically because she had told him it was the most useful week of training she had ever received. He had remembered. Of course he had. "I need to immobilize this properly before we move," she said. "It's going to hurt." "I know. More than you've been managing it." "I know," he said again, and his voice was completely steady, and she didn't look up because looking up right now was not something she could afford to do. She worked quickly. Her hands moved with the same precision they had moved with in St. Jude's Memorial 14 hours and a world ago, and he made no sound. Not when she realigned, not when she packed and splinted, not when she secured the wrap tight enough to actually stabilize the fracture for movement. Not a sound. The level of pain control required for that was extraordinary, and she knew it, and she didn't say anything about it because there was nothing useful to say. "Beyond the leg," she said, moving upward. "What else?" "2 broken ribs on the right side healed poorly. Infection in the left forearm. I've been managing it, but the antibiotic supply ran out 12 days ago." A pause. "Nutritional deficiency obvious. Some hearing loss in the right ear, probably from a percussion event 8 months ago. Nothing immediately life-threatening." She checked the arm. The infection was more serious than his voice made it sound. She administered antibiotics immediately and noted that the full course would need to continue, something she would have to manage through the extraction window and beyond. "You've been doing your own medical assessments," she said. "Someone taught me to pay attention to the body," he said. "Told me most people wait until something screams at them instead of listening when it whispers." She had said that, exactly that, over a meal in a forward base in a country whose name didn't appear in records 5 years ago. She remembered the moment clearly. She had been eating terrible instant noodles, and he had been asking her why she had cross-trained in medicine when she was already qualified in everything else, and she had told him that knowledge was the one thing no one could take away from you in the field. She kept her face professional, kept her hands moving. "Cardinal," she said, "tell me." "Cardinal is a man named Reyes." He watched her face for the reaction and saw it controlled into nothing. "Not the same Reyes on the carrier, I don't think, but connected to Cross's network. He fed accurate information for the first 8 months of the operation. Then something changed. The information got cleaner. Too clean. Like someone was curating it. On when did you realize it was compromised? 4 weeks ago, one of the militia commanders made a comment casual, the kind you make when you're comfortable, when you think the person you're talking to doesn't speak your language. He referenced a communication. The timing, the content, it matched a report I knew Cardinal had filed. His jaw tightened. They'd been using Cardinal to shape our intelligence picture, feeding us what they wanted us to act on. And the operation was walked into deliberately. Yes. He said it with the flat certainty of a man who had had 4 weeks to sit with the conclusion and let it calcify. The question is who authorized it? Cross has a long history of operations that sacrifice one asset to protect a larger operation. I've suspected for a long time that Nightfall was... He stopped, his head turned slightly. She heard it too. Movement in the corridor. Not random. Coordinated. They know you're inside, he said quietly. Not panic, calculation. Yes. She was already closing the medical kit, already reading the room. The door she'd come through, the single high window, the structural walls. How mobile are you, honestly? Tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. She looked at him. In that moment, the 31 months collapsed, not erased, but collapsed, compressed into a single point, and he was simply the person she had operated beside for 6 years, the person whose capabilities and limits she knew more accurately than she knew her own handwriting, the person she trusted with her life in the most literal and non-metaphorical way that phrase could be applied. Up, she said. On the good leg, I'm your left side. He got up. She went in under his left arm and he transferred weight carefully, professionally, making the adjustment between them with the ease of people who had moved together in worse circumstances. He was heavier than she expected. He'd lost weight, but he was still. James still constructed like someone who had never quite stopped being an athlete, and she recalibrated and held. Ready, she said. Since you walked in the door, he said. They moved. The first guard she encountered in the corridor was already turning, already reacting to something he had heard, and she handled him in 3 seconds with her free hand and the specific economy of motion that came from not being able to use the other one. James maintained his own balance against the wall for those 3 seconds, without being asked, understanding, immediately shifting his weight, holding himself up. Then she was back, and they moved again. Second, third. The corridor had 2 more between them and the exit Marco had marked on the map. She took the second. James and she realized a half second before it happened what he was going to do because she knew him, because she had spent 6 years learning to read him, took the third, one-arm compromised balance, a broken leg, 12 days of nutritional deficiency. He took the third guard out with a controlled, precise movement that should not have been physically achievable, and was anyway, and then he leaned back against the wall and breathed through what that had cost him without making any complaint about it. Don't, she said, her voice tight. I'm fine. You're not fine, and if you tear anything in that leg, then you'll fix it, he said, and there was something in his voice, a certainty, not blind, not desperate, but grounded in evidence, the certainty of a man who had been watching her work since before she walked through that door and had updated his assessment accordingly. That's what you do. She exhaled sharply through her nose. Move, she said. They moved. The exit was 30 meters and 2 more guards away. She took the guards. He managed the door. They came out into the pre-dawn dark, and she oriented immediately, compassed the heading already built into her body from the walk-in, and they moved east. For 12 minutes, neither of them spoke. Conversation was not the priority. Movement was the priority, the steady, managed, pain-controlled movement of 2 people covering ground as efficiently as the facts on the ground allowed. Then James said, You didn't want to come. It wasn't a question. He knew her. I was retired, she said. Sterling convinced you. Sterling told me you were alive. She kept her eyes on the terrain ahead. That was sufficient. He was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, he said, for the 31 months. You were captured, James. You don't apologize for being captured. I'm not apologizing for being captured. He paused, choosing the words with the care of someone who had rehearsed them in the dark for a very long time. I'm apologizing for the year before that, for the way I left things, for what I didn't say when I had the chance to say it. Another pause. I had a lot of time to think about that. She said nothing, kept moving. The medical kit shifted on her back, and the weight of it was the weight of everything she had carried out of St. Jude's Memorial and across the ocean and through the dark, and underneath that weight was the thing she had locked in the compartment, the thing she had given exactly 12 minutes to on the carrier floor before putting it away, the grief and the anger and the love that had never, despite 3 years and 4 months and 11 days of deliberate effort, stopped existing. Audrey, he said. He almost never used her name. He used it the way people use words. They're careful with words they know have weight and don't want to spend carelessly. Not now, she said. When you're stable and extracted, and I've had sleep and food and at least one very large cup of coffee. Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice she used in the ER when a patient needed reassurance that a difficult conversation was not being avoided, only deferred. Everything you want to say to me, I want to hear, all of it, but not while I am carrying you across 11 kilometers of compromised terrain with 6 guards down behind us and a 72-hour extraction window that started 40 minutes ago. A pause. Fair, he said. Thank you. The coffee might be a problem out here. James is moving, he said. They had covered 5 kilometers, more than halfway, the leg holding the infection, responding, his breathing steady, and managed when her radio gave the signal she had been given on the carrier. The extraction window contact check. She clicked twice in response, proceeding no emergency. The carrier would maintain position for another 51 hours. Then a third click came back. Not in the protocol. She stopped. James stopped with her. That's not the acknowledgement sequence, he said quietly. He had memorized it from her briefing because of course he had. No, she said. A voice came through, low and direct and familiar. Torres. Viper. Change of plan. Sterling's been removed from operational control. Cross has taken direct command and issued a stand-down order. A pause, and in that pause, Audrey could hear the precise, controlled anger of a professional woman who had discovered that the board had been rearranged in the night. The official position is that you've gone off protocol. They're framing it as an unauthorized extraction. James made a sound that was not quite a word. Torres, Audrey said. Where is Sterling now? Confined to quarters aboard the carrier, pending inquiry. Another pause. Cross wants to drive Viper. That's what this is. He doesn't care about Cutter. He never cared about Cutter. The extraction was the cover story to get someone in to recover the hard drive. Once he realized the operation was compromised, he decided to let it burn and send you in to pull the one thing that matters to him. The drive, the hard drive, the full operational record of Nightfall sources, methods, names. In the wrong hands, it burned the entire network. In Cross's hands, it was leverage. The specific, permanent kind of leverage that men like Cross collected and held and used and called national security. She looked at James. He was already reaching into his jacket. His hand came out with something small and flat and unremarkable, an object that had survived 31 months of captivity in the possession of a man who had never once apparently considered handing it over. He held it out. She took it. You've been carrying this the whole time, she said. I knew someone would eventually come for it, he said. I wanted to make sure it went to the right person. What's on it? He met her eyes. Everything, he said, including Cross, including what he authorized 18 months ago that nobody in that briefing room is going to want on record. He paused. Including what really happened to Nightfall and why. She closed her hand around the drive. Torres's voice came through again. I have a maritime contact who is not under Cross's command. There is an alternate extraction point 8 kilometers south. I can have them there in 4 hours. But Viper, if Cross's people reach you first. They won't, she said. You have Cutter. She looked at him. He looked back 5 kilometers from where she had found him, standing on a broken leg with an infected arm, and 31 months behind his eyes, and still the steadiest thing in her immediate orbit. I have him, she said. Then move south, Torres said. And Viper, whatever's on that drive, make sure it gets to someone who isn't Cross. Someone who will actually... The channel clicked dead. Audrey stared at the radio for 1 second. She cut off, James said. Or she was cut off. Audrey put the radio away, looked south, looked at James, did the math, 8 kilometers, broken leg, 4 hours, unknown pursuit timeline. Manageable. Barely. but manageable. Cross sent you in knowing the operation was compromised, James said. His voice was very quiet. He used Sterling's loyalty to you to get you moving, used my message to make it personal, and calculated that you'd go in regardless. He needed someone with the right skills and the right reason, and he found both in you. He made a calculation error, she said. What's that? He calculated that I'd prioritize the drive over you. She put the hard drive in the medical kit between the blood products and the surgical pack where it would be protected. He doesn't understand triage. James was quiet for a moment. Then against everything, he almost smiled. No, he said. I don't imagine he does. South, and she said. They moved south. Behind them, somewhere in the dark, the building they had left was alive with light and movement and the sound of people discovering what had happened. And somewhere on a carrier in the Celebes Sea, a 4-star general with a very long history of removing pieces from the board was learning that one of his pieces had looked at the board, understood the game, and decided to play a different one entirely. The sky ahead was beginning to gray at the edges. Not dawn yet, not safety yet, but the direction of both. 8 kilometers. She matched her pace to his. He matched his to hers, the way they always had. They moved. 8 kilometers is nothing. 8 kilometers is a morning run, a commute, a distance that on a map looks like a finger's width. 8 kilometers with a man on a broken leg, a compromised operation closing in from behind, and a hard drive and a medical kit that at least one 4-star general was willing to burn a human being to recover 8 kilometers becomes something else entirely. It becomes every step. They covered the first 2 in 22 minutes. Good pace. Sustainable. She monitored him the way she monitored every patient she had ever moved under pressure. Not with obvious clinical attention that would make him feel managed, but with the peripheral awareness she had developed over years of working in conditions where the difference between a patient who could push further and a patient who was about to collapse was something you felt before you saw. His breathing pattern, the subtle shift in how much weight transferred to her shoulder, the way his jaw set when the leg sent a message he was choosing not to voice. He was pushing past what the leg wanted to allow. She knew it. He knew she knew it. Neither of them said anything about it because saying something about it would require slowing down, and slowing down was not currently available. Cross is going to have people moving within 20 minutes of them finding the building, James said. His voice was steady, the controlled steadiness of a man regulating his breath and his words simultaneously. He'll know the alternate extraction point is south. Torres gave us the direction, and if they pulled Torres' communication, they pulled it, Audrey said. We have to assume they pulled everything the moment she went dark. Then south is compromised. South is the direction Torres pointed us. Torres is smart. She gave us south because she wanted them to follow south. Audrey kept moving, kept scanning. Where would Torres actually send the contact? James thought for 3 seconds. She mentioned a maritime contact not under Cross's command. If she's working around Cross, she's working through Sterling's network. Sterling's people know this coastline. There's a fishing village 11 kilometers northwest of the original insertion point. Small commercial dock. It's been used before for other things. How far is that from here? From here, he calculated, 6 kilometers northwest. She adjusted their heading without breaking stride. He adjusted with her, seamless, the two of them moving like something that had never fully stopped existing, even across 3 years and 4 months and 31 months of dark. That's Torres's actual message, Audrey said. South was the misdirection. She knew the channel was being monitored when she sent it. You got that from a direction and a cutoff. I got that from knowing how Torres thinks. She paused. She was on the original Nightfall team. She told me that on the carrier. She knows this operation the way you know it. She's been watching Cross the same way you have. James was quiet for a moment. She's been running her own parallel track, he said, and the respect in his voice was the specific, undemonstrative respect of a professional recognizing another professional. For how long I fight they can, long enough to have a maritime contact ready and a misdirection protocol in place before I ever landed on that carrier. Audrey's eyes moved constantly. She was preparing for exactly this contingency, which means she expected Cross to move the moment the operation became recoverable. She expected him to sacrifice the extraction to control the asset. Yes, and she built a way around it. She built a way around it, Audrey confirmed. All she needed was someone on the ground to read the signal correctly. James made a sound that was almost a laugh, not quite because laughing required breath he was directing elsewhere, but the shape of one. She picked the right person, he said. They moved northwest. At the 3-kilometer mark, she stopped him. Not because of pursuit, she hadn't heard or seen anything behind them, which was not the same as nothing being there, but it was a data point. She stopped him because his breathing had changed in the specific way that meant the leg had crossed from manageable pain into the beginning of a physiological response she needed to interrupt before it became a liability. Sit, she said. We don't have time. 30 seconds. Sit. She was already opening the kit. She administered the pain management component she had been conserving, made 2 rapid adjustments to the splint, checked the infected arm, looked at his eyes. Clear, exhausted, present. How's your head? Clear. Dizzy. No. What time you ate? He thought, yesterday morning. Something Marco brought. She pulled a nutrition bar from the kit's side pocket. She had packed 3 because she had been planning for a patient who needed to move under his own power and put it in his hand. Eat it, all of it, don't argue. He ate it. He didn't argue. Then he looked at her with the expression of a man who had been saving something, holding it back, and had just decided the holding was costing more than the saying. In that transcript, he said, the 4 words, "Did Sterling give it to you complete?" She looked at him. He gave me 4 words. Tell Viper. Tell her. James nodded slowly. There were more words, he said. The contact Cardinal before I knew he was compromised. Cardinal told me the message was relayed as 4 words. What was actually transmitted was longer. He met her eyes. I sent 12 words. She waited. Tell Viper I'm sorry. Tell her I'm coming home if she'll have me. He said it quietly without performance, the way someone recites a thing they have said in their own heads so many times that the saying of it aloud has become almost secondary to its existence. Sterling cut it to 4 words. I don't know if he did it because he thought it was operationally irrelevant, or because he stopped, or because he knew exactly what the whole message would do to you and he needed you moving fast and clean. Sterling had given her 4 words because 4 words were sufficient to get her on the helicopter. 12 words might have made her ask questions he didn't have time for. Sterling, who had flown to Norfolk personally, who had stood in that waiting room with the gravity of a man delivering a message he had rehearsed, Sterling had made a calculation. Smaller than Cross's calculation, kinder in intent, but a calculation nonetheless. She absorbed this, sat with it for exactly the number of seconds it deserved. Then she closed the medical kit and stood up. Let's move, she said. Audrey. James. She looked at him, and this time she let him see something. Not everything, not the 12-minute portion she had locked away on the carrier floor, but enough, the edge of it. Enough so he knew it existed and knew she had heard him. I came across an ocean for you. I think that answers the question. She extended her hand. Up. He took her hand, got up, stood. Okay, he said. His voice was different, lighter in the specific way that weight becomes lighter when it is shared rather than carried alone. Okay. They moved. The second 3 kilometers was harder than the first. The terrain worked against them, uneven slowing, demanding attention they needed to spend on other things. Twice she heard sounds that could have been pursuit, and both times she steered them into stillness and waited. And both times the sounds resolved into nothing threatening. The third time she heard something, she did not steer them into stillness. She steered them into a dead stop and said very quietly, behind us, 200 meters, moving fast. James heard it. How many? 2, maybe 3, she assessed. Too fast for a search pattern. They have a direction. They pulled Torres's communication, he said. Yes. She looked at him, looked at the terrain, made the calculation speed distance, condition of her patient distance to the extraction point. There is a version of this where I deal with pursuit and you continue moving. No, he said immediately. James. Absolutely not. His voice was flat and final. I've been on my own for 31 months. That's enough. We move together or not at all. She looked at him for a half second. The stubbornness in his face was entirely familiar. It was the same stubbornness that had made him a difficult asset and an extraordinary operator, and the one person in 6 years of working dangerous places who had never once left her without backup when it mattered. Together then, she said. Faster. They went faster. The leg paid for it. He paid for the leg. She felt every payment through her shoulder and said nothing because there was nothing to say that would make the arithmetic different. 1 kilometer from the coast, her radio clicked. 1 click, then 2, then 1. Not a protocol she had been given on the carrier, a protocol she recognized from 7 years ago. A field signal obsolete, specific to a team that no longer officially existed. Torres. She clicked back 212. 30 seconds of silence. Then a voice, not Torres, a man's voice, low and deliberate, and carrying the particular quality of someone speaking in a situation where being heard by the wrong ears would have serious consequences. Contact in position. Dock is clear. You have a 15-minute window starting from this transmission. 15 minutes, 1 kilometer. She looked at James. He had already started moving. They came off the last rise and onto flat ground with 11 minutes remaining in the window, which would have been comfortable if the 2 people pursuing them hadn't closed the distance to roughly 80 meters during the last kilometer's push. She could hear them clearly now. Not militia, the movement was different, the equipment, sound was different. Cross's people, better trained, more dangerous. They're going to reach us before the dock, James said. Not alarm, assessment. I know. She made the decision in 2 seconds, the same way she made every triage decision, quickly without the luxury of doubt, based on what was true rather than what she wished were true. You keep moving, you do not stop. Whatever you hear behind you, you do not stop. Audrey, I need you on that boat, James. The drive needs to get out. You are the mission. She held his eyes. I will be right behind you. He stared at her for a moment, the long, complex look of a man who had spent 31 months thinking about all the things he would say when he got the chance to say them, confronted with the reality that the saying was still going to have to wait. Right behind me, he said, not a question, a requirement. Right behind you, she confirmed. He moved. She turned. The 2 operatives came out of the dark at a controlled run, and she met them the way she had always met things that came at her directly without retreat, with the complete and economical focus of someone who has stripped the situation down to its essential components and found only one viable path forward. The first exchange was fast and sharp, and she took a hit she was going to feel tomorrow across her ribs, and she did not feel it now because now was not tomorrow. She handled the first operative. The second was better, faster, and the 30 seconds it took to handle him were 30 seconds she was going to have to recover in the final sprint to the dock. She turned and ran. James was 40 meters ahead, moving well better than the legs should have allowed, running on whatever reserve a person builds when they have been waiting long enough for something that they will not permit their body to be the reason it doesn't happen. She could see the dock lights. She ran. She covered the 40 meters, came up beside him. He looked at her face at the beginning of what was going to be a spectacular bruise across her right cheekbone, and she watched him make the decision not to address it right now, and she respected the decision. The dock, the boat. A man she didn't know who handled boats the way she handled patients, with the calm authority of someone who had never considered the possibility of failure. James went aboard first, one controlled movement that cost him visibly, and then she went aboard, and then the man said 2 words, hold on, and the engine. Note shifted, and they moved. She sat next to James on the bench seat, and they moved across dark water, and behind them the lights on the dock were very small and getting smaller, and eventually they were gone. For several minutes neither of them spoke. The water was black and the sky was gray at the eastern edge, and somewhere between the blackness and the gray was the particular quality of air that exists only in the last minutes before dawn, the world holding its breath before it decides to continue. Your face, James said finally. Is fine, she said. It doesn't look fine. It'll look worse tomorrow. She paused. I've had worse. I know. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you for coming. She thought about 3 years and 4 months and 11 days in a hospital in Norfolk being competent and quiet and entirely forgettable. She thought about the weight of 10 lives in 1 hour and the 4-star Admiral walking through doors and a name she had tried to put away. She thought about Donna at the nurse's station with a pen turning in her fingers and Dr. Holloway standing in a corridor watching the door close on an explanation he never got, and a 16-year-old boy in Bay 9 who had grabbed her wrist and asked if he was going to die and been told no, with a certainty that came from someplace deeper than medicine. "You sent your bracelet," she said. "I thought you'd recognize it." "I made that bracelet, James." I said, "I know." A pause. "I've been wearing it for 7 years." She looked at the water. The sky was graying faster now, the horizon beginning to define itself. "When we get back," she said, "there are things that need to happen. The drive goes to oversight, not Sterling, not Cross's network. Actual oversight, congressional level inspector, general, someone with the independence to look at what's on it and act on what they find." "Agreed. Cross needs to be accountable." "Agreed." "And Sterling," she stopped, thought about the 4 words versus 12. The calculation about what she needed to hear to get on a helicopter versus what she had needed to hear as a person. "Sterling is more complicated." "He got you there," James said. "He also edited a message that wasn't his to edit." "Yes," a pause, son. "Both of those things are true." She nodded. "Let that sit. Let it be complicated, the way real things were complicated when you stopped managing them from a distance and let them be what they were." "And after all of that," James said carefully, "what happens to all of this to you? Do you go back to the hospital?" She had not let herself think about that. Not on the helicopter, not on the carrier, not in 2 hours on a floor. There had been no space for it in the operational calculus. But now on a boat moving across dark water, with the sky lightening by degrees and the man she had crossed an ocean for sitting beside her now, there was space. The hospital, the nurse's station, the bad coffee and the board with the patient roster, and Donna's steady, loyal 16 years of emergency medicine presence. The teenage boy who had matched her breath. The 67-year-old man with the gold wedding ring. Bay 6, Bay 9, Bay 12. 10 lives in 1 hour. She thought about what Donna had asked in the ambulance bay voice, quiet and tight, with something that was trying not to be grief. Was any of it real? All of it was real. That was still true. That would always be true. "I don't know yet," she said. "Both things are real. Both of them are who I am." She looked at James. "That's going to take some figuring out." He nodded. "I'll be there," he said, "while you figure it out. I'll be there." She looked at him for a long moment. The beard, the lines, the eyes that were exactly the same. The man who had sent 12 words and had them cut to 4 and had waited in the dark for her to read the signal correctly, which she always did because that was the specific and unkillable thing between them. The reading of signals, the trust built from years of being in impossible places and coming out the other side. "I know," she said, and she did. The eastern sky was pink now, the first genuine color of the day bleeding up from the horizon, and the boat moved steadily across the water, and behind them was an island with a compromise operation, and a general who was about to have the worst morning of his professional career, and ahead of them was a carrier and a debrief and a drive full of evidence and everything that followed from it, which would be complicated and exhausting and necessary. And beside her was James Cutter, alive and broken, and whole in the ways that mattered, with a paracord bracelet on his wrist that she had braided with her own hands 7 years ago in another country that had somehow survived 31 months in a dark place and come back to her, because that was what things did when they were real. They came back. She reached over and covered his hand with hers, not dramatically, not with words. Just the simple, grounded, unglamorous gesture of a woman who had spent 3 years and 4 months and 11 days being nobody, and 1 night being everything she actually was, and who was only now on a boat in the pre-dawn dark beginning to understand that those two things were not opposites, that the nurse and the operative and the woman who carried people when they couldn't carry themselves, they were the same person. They had always been the same person. Audrey Jenkins had not disappeared that night in the emergency department of St. Jude's Memorial. She had simply been seen finally and completely for the first time. And viper sharp and trained and capable of things that most people spent their lives never needing to know were possible, Viper had never been a mask. She had been the part of Audrey that refused to let people die when she could stop it. They were the same. They had always been the same. The boat reached the carrier at 0641. The sun was fully up. Sterling was waiting on the deck, not confined to quarters apparently because Torres had managed something in the night that Sterling would explain later in a debrief that would run for 6 hours and generate a report that 47 people would read, and that would eventually, through channels as complicated and unglamorous as real things always are, find its way to the people who needed to act on it. Cross would face a closed-door inquiry that would strip his consulting clearances and end the remnants of his career with the quiet, devastating efficiency that institutions deploy when they want accountability without spectacle. It would not be enough. It would be what happened. Torres would receive a commendation that no one outside a very small room would ever see. She would accept it with the flat professional nod of a woman who had never done the thing for the commendation. James Cutter would spend 8 weeks in a Navy medical facility in Guam and would walk out of it with a slight, permanent limp that he would spend the subsequent years refusing to acknowledge, and that Audrey would spend the subsequent years watching with the specific vigilance of someone who knew exactly what that joint had been through. And Audrey Jenkins, nurse operative, the woman nobody had noticed for 3 years and 4 months and 11 days who had saved 10 lives in 1 hour on a Tuesday night in Norfolk, Virginia, and then walked through an ambulance bay door and crossed the world to save one more. Audrey Jenkins would go back to St. Jude's Memorial. Not immediately, not for several months, but she would go back because the work was real and the people were real, and Donna Reyes deserved the explanation she had been owed since the night a 4-star Admiral walked into an emergency department and saluted a nurse. When she walked back through those doors, Donna would look at her for a long time without speaking. Then Donna would say simply, "I kept your charts current," and Audrey would say, "Thank you," and they would go back to work, because the work didn't stop. It never stopped, and neither, it turned out, did she. Some people spend their lives trying to be ordinary. Audrey Jenkins had spent 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days at it. In the end, it only took 1 hour to remember who she really was and 1 ocean to prove it.